Your name has become a liability, Elara. The text from my mother lit up my phone at 6:15 a.m. A cold digital execution. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I just placed my half-empty mug of tea on a coaster, picked up my phone, and made 2 calls. The first was to my intellectual property attorney, instructing him to file immediate injunctions on the use of all 47 of my proprietary glasswork designs. The second was to my server administrator, telling him to revoke all access keys to the digital archives of the Avery Design House, the archives I personally built and curated. By 7:00 a.m., my brother Liam, the golden boy frontman of our family's empire, had called 3 times, each call more frantic than the last. At 8:30 a.m., my father left a voicemail, his voice not angry, but dangerously calm. "Call me, now. We have a problem only you can fix." I deleted it without listening to the end. I wasn't fixing anything ever again. What I never expected, what years of being the silent engine in my family's machine never prepared me for, was how quickly they would offer me up as the sacrifice. Not for a mistake I made, but for a catastrophe Liam orchestrated. He sold a dream he couldn't build, and when it shattered, he pointed the shards at me. All it took was one lie, whispered in the right ears at the right moment of panic. And my family, the people who built their reputation on my talent, chose to protect the salesman, not the artist. They chose to protect the brand, not the person who gave the brand its soul. The text message wasn't a punishment. It was a release. They thought they were cutting me off. They had no idea they were just cutting the wires to their own life support. At 6:20 a.m., I logged into the server that housed the blueprints and chemical formulas for my signature fused glass. I moved every file into a privately encrypted offline vault. The Avery Design House's secret techniques, as their marketing brochures called them, were now mine, and mine alone. At 6:45 a.m., I sent a registered letter via my attorney, formally resigning from my position on the company board, a position they gave me as a token gesture years ago, never expecting I'd use it. I also revoked the power of attorney I had granted my father over my personal investment portfolio, the one I had naively allowed to be entangled with theirs. By 7:00 a.m., Liam's call started. I watched his name flash on the screen. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling because a client was probably screaming at him, and he didn't have the answers. He never did. At 8:30 a.m., my father's voicemail came through. That phrase, "a problem only you can fix," it used to be my purpose. Now, it was my poison. I just took a sip of my lukewarm tea and watched the sun rise over the city. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about quarantine. I was isolating a disease before it consumed me whole. And as I sat there, in the quiet of my own apartment, I realized something freeing. The person they thought I was. The quiet, compliant, endlessly forgiving Elara. She didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never had. They had just never bothered to look closely enough to see the steel beneath the glass. My life was divided into 2 distinct spaces, the heat and the cool. The heat was my studio, a converted warehouse in the industrial district, always smelling of ozone, silica dust, and the faint, sharp scent of metal oxides. It was loud, chaotic, and relentlessly hot from the kilns that ran nearly 24 hours a day. It was where I worked with my hands, where I coaxed solid, brittle sheets of glass into fluid, light-bending sculptures. It was where the magic happened, the real magic. The Cool was the Avery Design House Gallery downtown, a pristine, white-walled temple of minimalism. Marble floors, recessed lighting, air that was always chilled to a perfect 68 degrees. It was a place of hushed tones, champagne flutes, and million-dollar handshakes. This was my brother Liam's world. He moved through it like a prince, dressed in bespoke suits, his smile as polished as the sculptures he sold. He didn't know the difference between cobalt oxide and copper carbonate, but he knew how to tell a story. He could speak of artistic vision and ethereal quality with a conviction that made people believe he'd bled for the art himself. My parents, Richard and Catherine, were the architects of this dynamic. They were the bridge between the heat and the cool. My father handled the big money clients and the business strategy, a man who saw art as an asset class. My mother managed the brand, the PR, the narrative. She was the one who curated the image of the Avery family, a dynasty of design. In that story, Liam was the visionary, the prodigy, and I was the technician, the gifted craftsperson, the brilliant but reclusive sister who brought Liam's grand ideas to life. It was a lie, of course, a comfortable, profitable lie we had all lived for over a decade. Liam had never had a grand idea in his life. He'd bring me a vague concept, a photo from a magazine, a single word like fluidity, and say, "Can you do something with this?" And I would. I would retreat to the heat, sketch for days, run simulations, test formulas, and emerge months later with something beautiful, something entirely my own. He would then take it to the Cool, place it on a pedestal, and call it our latest creation. They all did. "We are so proud of what we've accomplished," my mother would say in interviews. They needed me, but they didn't want me. They needed my hands, my brain, my soul, but they wanted Liam's face, his charm, his easy confidence. I was the secret ingredient they kept locked away in the kitchen, while he was the handsome host, charming the guests in the dining room. I let it happen for years because I loved the work more than I craved the credit. I thought the art spoke for itself. I was naive. I believed that as long as I could create, the rest was just noise. But the noise was getting louder, and the silence from my own family was becoming deafening. The injustice wasn't a single crashing wave. It was a slow rising tide that had been eroding my foundations for years. It was in the small things, the daily dismissals that accumulated like silt in a riverbed, slowly choking the flow. It was my father, in a board meeting, explaining a complex structural challenge I had solved by saying, "Liam had an innovative thought, and Elara, our technical expert, found a way to execute it." I was sitting right there, invisible. It was my mother, gently correcting a journalist who referred to me as the primary artist. "Oh, it's a true partnership," she'd say with a serene smile. "Liam is the visionary, the conductor. Elara is our brilliant first violin. The orchestra wouldn't work without both." But everyone knows the conductor gets the bow. It was Liam, standing next to me at a gallery opening, in front of a piece that had taken me 6 months and 3 failed attempts to perfect. A collector asked him about the inspiration. He launched into a completely fabricated story about a dream he'd had, a story so vivid and compelling that even I started to doubt my own memory. He never once looked at me. He didn't need to. I had been conditioned to be silent, to nod along, to be the quiet, supportive sister. My role was to make the art, not to talk about it. The simmering resentment began to crystallize around the finances. I saw the numbers. I knew that the materials I needed, the custom-built kilns, the rare mineral pigments, they were expensive. I was always told to be mindful of the budget, to find cheaper alternatives. Yet, I'd see the expense reports. Liam's client entertainment receipts from Michelin star restaurants, his first-class flights to research trips in Milan or Tokyo, the lease on his Porsche, all filed under company expenses. My request for a new ventilation system for the studio, a critical safety need, was put on hold for 6 months due to cash flow issues. But the company bonus that year, which was split 40-40-20 between my parents and Liam, was the highest it had ever been. I didn't get a bonus. I got a salary. I was an employee in the house my own hands had built. The quiet requests for my help bled into my personal life. Elara, darling, Liam is in a bit of a bind with his mortgage this month. Could you just... Elara, the gallery's property taxes are higher than we expected. We need a temporary float from your investment account. We'll pay you back. They never did. I was the family's emergency fund, the silent investor, the human backstop for their lavish lifestyle, all while being told to cut costs on the very art that funded it all. I was living in a modest apartment while they were living in a sprawling mansion, all of it built on the foundation of my work. The anger wasn't loud. It was a low, constant hum in the back of my mind, a quiet bitterness that soured my tea in the morning. I kept working because the studio was my sanctuary. The fire of the kiln was the only thing that could burn away the cold feeling of being used. I told myself it was for the art, but a part of me knew I was just waiting. I wasn't sure what for, but I knew that a structure built on a lie as fundamental as this one could not stand forever. The breaking point had a name: the Elysian Project. It was the commission of a lifetime, a massive, suspended glass installation for the atrium of a new billion-dollar corporate headquarters in Dubai. It was our chance to go from a national name to a global one. The client wasn't a person. It was a committee, and they were demanding, specific, and had an astronomical budget. They wanted something that looked like a frozen waterfall of light, something that defied gravity. The design I spent 4 months creating was ambitious, but possible. It involved hundreds of individually sculpted, interlocking glass panels, engineered to a fraction of a millimeter, tempered with a proprietary technique I'd spent years perfecting. It was my masterpiece. I gave Liam the schematics, the material specs, and a strict timeline. I told him, unequivocally, that there could be no deviations. The structural integrity was balanced on a knife's edge. "Got it, sis. Genius as always. Let me handle the clients," he'd said with his usual easy charm. He handled them all right. 2 months before the installation deadline, I discovered he'd done the unthinkable. The clients had wanted a slightly different color, a more iridescent sheen. My formula for that specific type of glass couldn't produce it. Instead of telling them it was impossible, Liam, without consulting me, had found a third-party manufacturer in China who promised they could replicate my work for a fraction of the cost and with the desired color. He signed a contract with them, passed off my designs as his own, and planned to integrate their cheaper, inferior panels with mine, hoping I wouldn't notice until it was too late. He did it to cut costs and pocket the difference, framing it to our parents as a brilliant business move that increased the profit margin. When I found the shipping manifest by accident, I confronted him. The argument was the worst we'd ever had. It wasn't in the cool gallery. It was in the heat of my studio. I was screaming, my voice hoarse. "You can't do this, Liam. Their glass isn't tempered the same way. It won't hold the stress. The entire structure could fail." He was dismissive, arrogant. "You're being dramatic, Elara. It's glass. They're experts. Dad and Mom agree it's a smart business decision. Don't let your artistic temperament ruin the biggest deal of our lives." That was the moment I saw it clearly. They had discussed it. They had looked at the numbers and made a calculated decision to risk my art, my reputation, and potentially the safety of others, to make more money. The unveiling was a grand affair. Journalists, dignitaries, the corporate elite, all gathered in the soaring atrium. My parents and Liam were there, beaming for the cameras. I refused to go. I stayed in my apartment, watching a pirated live stream, my stomach in knots. The installation was breathtakingly beautiful. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope I was wrong. The CEO gave a speech. My father gave a speech. And then Liam, the visionary artist, took the stage to a round of thunderous applause. As he spoke about his vision, a low, ominous groaning sound echoed through the atrium. A single, hairline crack appeared in one of the central panels, one of the Chinese-made panels. Then, another. Then, in a horrifying cascade of sound and light, the entire central section of the installation shattered, raining thousands of pounds of glass down into the atrium. It was a miracle. No one was standing directly underneath it. The live stream cut out. My phone exploded. But the first message I read was the text from my mother, sent from the heart of the chaos. Her first instinct, not to ask if I was okay, but to assign blame. "The media is calling this a catastrophic design flaw. Your name has become a liability, Elara." That was it. Not Liam confessed, not we messed up, but your name. The name they had worked so hard to keep in the shadows was now the only one they were willing to put in the line of fire. Their betrayal was absolute. The moments after I read that text were not filled with tears or rage. It was a strange, chilling calm. The kind of calm you feel in the eye of a hurricane. The world was screaming outside, but inside my apartment, everything went still. The decision was not made in that moment. It was merely executed. The decision had been forming for years, forged in the heat of 1,000 silent injustices. I stood up from my chair, my movements deliberate, precise. I was no longer an artist. I was a demolitions expert, preparing to bring down a condemned building. My building. The call to my attorney, Arthur Vance, was short. Arthur was old school, a man who believed in contracts and consequences. Arthur, it's Elara Avery. I need to file an immediate, ex parte injunction against Avery Design House for unauthorized use and modification of my intellectual property. All 47 registered designs. I'm emailing you the list now. There was a pause on the line. Elara? What happened? They broke it, Arthur. Now they don't get to have it anymore. I didn't wait for a reply. I hung up and made the second call. Mark, it's Elara. I need you to execute Emergency Protocol Alpha on the Avery archives. Revoke all keys, effective immediately. Lock it down. No one gets in. Not my father, not my brother. No one. Confirm when complete. Mark, my freelance server admin, was a ghost. I paid him well to ensure my digital life had backdoors only I could open. He just said, "Consider it done." Next, I opened my laptop. I accessed the secure portal for the company's operating accounts, an access point my father thought only he and the CFO had. For years, I had been the one quietly reconciling the books late at night, catching the errors and oversights. I didn't move any money. That would be illegal. Instead, I simply rescinded my personal guarantees on their line of credit. I had co-signed 3 major loans, using my own pristine credit and investment portfolio as collateral. Without my signature, the bank's risk assessment would trigger an immediate review. The credit line they used for daily operations would be frozen by morning. Finally, I walked over to the filing cabinet in my home office. I pulled out a thick binder, labeled Avery Legacy Fund. It was a private trust I had established 5 years ago, a fund my parents thought was a joint family asset. They contributed a token amount each year. I contributed a significant percentage of my salary. It was meant for emergencies, for long-term stability. They saw it as their personal slush fund for gallery renovations and down payments on vacation homes. I was the sole signatory with the power to dissolve it. I scanned the dissolution form, signed it with a steady hand, and attached it to a new email to Arthur Vance with the subject line, Phase 2. I did all of this in under 30 minutes. The whole time, my phone was buzzing incessantly on the counter, a frantic, vibrating beacon of their panic. Liam. My mother. Liam again. My father. I let it buzz. They were discovering one by one that the doors were locking. The lights were shutting off. The silent, invisible infrastructure that held up their glittering world was being systematically dismantled. And the person doing it wasn't a stranger or a competitor. It was the quiet girl from the studio, the one they thought would just sit in the ashes of the mess they made and quietly weep. They had fundamentally misunderstood me. I don't just work with glass. I understand its properties. I know that it can be beautiful and radiant. But I also know that when it's pushed past its breaking point, it doesn't just crack. It shatters. Why wasn't I surprised? Why didn't I fall apart? Because this wasn't the first time Liam had stolen my work, and my parents had let him. It was just the first time the consequences were too big to hide. My mind flashed back to the 8th grade science fair. I had spent 2 months building a working model of a magnetic levitation train. I had researched the physics, wound the copper coils myself, and painstakingly calibrated the electromagnets. It was my passion project. Liam, who had forgotten about the fair until the night before, was in a panic. He was supposed to build a simple volcano. The next morning, I found him in the garage, spray painting my name off the project board and clumsily writing his own. When I confronted him, tears streaming down my face, he just shrugged. "You always get A's. I'm failing science. This is more important for me." I ran to my parents expecting justice. My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "Elara, it's just a science fair. Liam is having a tough time at school. Let him have this one. It's not worth fighting over." My mother smoothed my hair. "Don't be selfish, darling. Family helps each other." I stood there, stunned into silence. They weren't punishing the thief. They were scolding the victim for reporting the crime. He won first prize. He got his picture in the local paper, standing next to my train, his arm around our proud father. I got a lecture on the importance of family unity. Then there was college. Liam wanted to get into a prestigious business school, but his grades were mediocre, and his essays were a mess. One evening, my mother came into my room, holding his application essay. "Darling, could you just punch this up a bit? You've always been the writer in the family." Punching it up turned into a complete rewrite. I spent a week crafting a compelling narrative about his supposed entrepreneurial spirit, inventing anecdotes, structuring arguments. He got in. They threw a huge party to celebrate. During his toast, he thanked our parents for their unwavering support. He never mentioned my name. It was the same pattern, over and over. The summer I spent developing a new glaze for a pottery class, he sold the pieces at a local market as his own. The business plan I wrote for a hypothetical company in a college class, he presented as his own idea to our father, which became the seed of the Avery Design House. Each time, I was told to let it go, to be the bigger person, that my talent was a gift to be shared with the family, that his success was my success. I was the ghostwriter of my brother's life. They didn't see it as theft. They saw it as resource allocation. I was the resource. He was the designated recipient of success. This time was different only in scale. The Elysian project wasn't a science fair model. It was a multi-million-dollar disaster with global headlines. The lie was too big to be swept under the rug with a gentle lecture about family unity. Their text message wasn't an anomaly. It was the logical conclusion of a lifetime of choices. They had been sacrificing my contributions for his benefit for 20 years. When the real crisis hit, it was muscle memory for them to throw me on the pyre to keep him warm. They thought I was the same quiet 8th grader who would just stand by and let it happen. They had no idea that every single time they had forced me to be silent, I wasn't forgiving. I was learning. I learned how they thought. I learned what they valued. Image over integrity, profit over people. And most importantly, I learned where all the weak points in the foundation were. The foundation they had forced me to build. The confrontation happened 3 days after the Dubai disaster. They didn't call first. They just showed up. Not at the pristine gallery, but at my studio. The one place that was mine. The one place they rarely visited because it was too dusty. The sight of their 2 luxury sedans, parked between a scrap metal truck and a welding supplier, was jarring. Liam, my father, and my mother walked in together. a united front. They were stepping out of the cool and into the heat, and they were visibly uncomfortable. The air was thick with the smell of my work, and for the first time, I felt like I had the home field advantage. My father spoke first, his voice tight with forced composure. "Elara, we need to talk. You need to turn the servers back on. You need to call the bank. You are strangling this company." I didn't say anything. I just continued polishing a small glass panel, my movements calm and steady. The rhythmic sound of cloth on glass was the only noise in the vast space. "Did you hear me?" he demanded, his voice rising. "I heard you," I said without looking up. "I just don't agree with your assessment. I'm not strangling the company. I'm just taking back what's mine." "What's yours?" Liam burst out, his face flushed with anger. "It's our company. We built this." "No," I said, finally putting the panel down and turning to face them. I looked directly at Liam. "I built the art. You sold it. And Mom and Dad built a story around it. We all played our parts. Now my part is over." My mother stepped forward, her face a mask of wounded sorrow. It was a look she had perfected over the years, the one that always worked. "Elara, how can you be so cruel? After everything we've done for you, we gave you the resources, the freedom to create." "Freedom?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "You call this freedom? I was a salaried employee, Mom. I was an asset on a balance sheet. You didn't give me freedom. You gave me a budget. A budget I had to beg for while Liam was expensing $500 dinners." "This is about money now?" my father scoffed. "This is beneath you." "It was always about money for you," I countered, my voice as sharp as broken glass. "You risked the entire project, my reputation, and public safety to increase your profit margin. You chose a cheap knockoff over my work. Don't you dare talk to me about what's beneath me." Liam, seeing the guilt trip failing, tried a different tactic. He softened his expression, stepping closer. "Look, sis, I messed up. I know. I was under a lot of pressure. I should have told you. But we can fix this. We just need to present a united front. If you just reactivate everything, we can release a statement, say there was a material supplier issue. We can weather this together." It was the same old script, the same plea for me to clean up his mess and disappear back into the background. "There is no we anymore, Liam," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "The moment you put my name on your failure, you burned that bridge. And the moment Mom and Dad co-signed that lie, they burned it with you." I walked over to the main door of the studio and slid the heavy industrial latch open. "The servers will remain offline. The designs remain my property. The credit line will remain frozen. You built a company on my back. Let's see how it stands on its own." They just stared at me, their expressions a mixture of shock, fury, and for the first time, a flicker of fear. They were finally realizing that the quiet engine in the basement had just shut itself off, and they had absolutely no idea how to start it again. They left without another word. The silence they left behind was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The collapse of the Avery Design House wasn't a sudden implosion. It was a slow, agonizing crumble, like a building sinking into a compromised foundation. The first visible crack appeared a week after our confrontation. Their website went down. Not the public-facing front end, but the exclusive client portal. The one that housed the high-resolution portfolios, upcoming design previews, and order tracking system. All of it ran through the servers I had locked. Their web developer, a freelancer they paid poorly, had no idea how to rebuild it from scratch. It was a black box I had created. Their digital showroom was gone. Then came the calls from clients. Wealthy collectors and interior designers who were used to Liam's smooth reassurances were now getting panicked. Vague answers. Where were the new designs for the full collection? Why were existing orders delayed? Liam, without access to my production notes, timelines, or material orders, was flying blind. He tried to replicate one of my simpler designs, a series of colored glass bowls. The results, I heard from a former supplier, were disastrous. The colors were muddy, the glass was brittle, and half the batch cracked in the kiln. He didn't have my formulas. He didn't understand the chemistry. He only knew how to sell the finished product. The financial squeeze started in earnest. The bank, spooked by the Dubai disaster and the sudden removal of my personal guarantee, had indeed frozen their line of credit pending a full review. Payroll was due. They couldn't make it. My father, in a move of pure desperation, sent me a one-line email. I need $250,000 wired by Friday. This is not a request. I archived it, without a reply. Meanwhile, I was quietly building. I didn't launch a website or open a gallery. I started with a single phone call to a client I had always respected, a hotel developer named Marcus Thorne. He had always dealt with Liam, but I had met him a few times, and we'd had substantive conversations about material science that Liam couldn't follow. I told him I was starting my own independent studio, focusing on smaller, bespoke, architectural installations. I didn't badmouth my family. I just said I was moving in a new creative direction. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Elara, I always suspected you were the real genius behind that operation. The Elysian project. That wasn't your work, was it? The design was mine. The materials were not." "I thought so," he said. "Send me a proposal for the lobby of my new boutique hotel in Aspen. No budget limit. I want your signature work. Uncompromised." That one call was the first stone in my new foundation. While my family was busy patching cracks and trying to stop the bleeding, I was quarrying fresh marble. News travels fast in the tight-knit world of high-end design. It started as whispers. "Did you hear Elara Avery left? The quality at Avery has taken a nosedive. They say Liam can't deliver on his promises anymore." The narrative my parents had so carefully constructed was being dismantled, not by me, but by their own incompetence. They had sold the world a story about a visionary. Now, the visionary was being asked to actually have a vision, and he was coming up empty. The ripple effects were spreading. They had lost their magic, because I was the magic, and I was gone. For years, I believed my value was intrinsically tied to the Avery name. I thought the gallery, the brand, the family legacy, was the vehicle for my talent. Without it, I feared my art would just be a hobby in a dusty warehouse. I was wrong. The lesson that began to dawn on me, in the quiet, productive weeks after the split, was that the vehicle was never the destination. A name is not something you are given, it's something you build. My parents and brother had spent their lives polishing a name, making sure it shone brightly in the public eye. But a name, like a sculpture, needs substance. It needs integrity from the core, or it's just a hollow shell. And their shell was cracking. My art didn't need the Avery Design House to be valuable. The Avery Design House needed my art to be legitimate. I had it backwards the entire time. They hadn't given me an opportunity. I had given them a career. This realization wasn't about ego. It was about ownership. Not financial ownership, but ownership of my own story, my own skill, my own worth. I spent 2 decades allowing them to be the narrators of my life. They cast me in a supporting role, and I accepted it because I was too focused on the work to fight for the credit. But when your name is dragged through the mud to protect someone else, you learn quickly that the only person who can truly define you is yourself. The ultimate lesson wasn't about revenge. Watching them struggle didn't bring me joy. It brought me a profound, almost painful clarity. Their entire empire was built on a single, unsustainable resource: my silence, my willingness to be invisible, my quiet acceptance of an unfair exchange. The moment I withdrew that resource, the entire structure became unstable. It proved that their business acumen, their salesmanship, their PR savvy, it was all worthless without the core product. And I was the core product. You can't build a legacy on a lie. You can't sustain a brand on charisma alone. Eventually, you have to deliver the goods. And the goods were locked in my studio, in my head, in my hands. I learned that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about knowing your value so deeply that you're willing to walk away from anyone who doesn't. It's about building your own table instead of fighting for scraps from someone else's. They didn't steal my art, they only borrowed my silence. And the loan had come due. The most painful part was realizing I had been complicit. By staying quiet, I had enabled them. By accepting the unfairness, I had taught them it was acceptable. My departure wasn't just an act of self-preservation. It was the final overdue correction to a market that had been imbalanced for far too long. It's been 8 months. My new studio, operating simply under my own name, Elara, is thriving in a way I never anticipated. I don't have a marble-floored gallery or a PR team. I have a simple, elegant website with high-resolution photos of my work and a single contact form. I'm booked out for the next 2 years. The Aspen Hotel lobby installation was a massive success, featured in 3 major architectural magazines. They called it a masterclass in structural grace. They used my name alone. The Avery Design House is still technically in business, but it's a ghost of its former self. They had to sell their flagship downtown gallery to cover their debts. The cool, pristine temple is now a high-end yoga studio. They operate out of a small rented office space. My father, I heard through the grapevine, was forced into retirement. His reputation was shattered after the Dubai incident and the subsequent financial fallout. My mother no longer gives interviews. There's no story left for her to spin. And Liam is the real tragedy in a way. His charm, once his greatest asset, became his curse. Without my work to back it up, his promises were just empty words. He tried hiring other glass artists, but talented people don't want to work for a man with a reputation for stealing credit and delivering inferior products. 2 weeks ago, I got an email. It was from him. The subject line was just my name. The body of the email was one sentence. I hear you're hiring. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The man who had ruined my name, betrayed my trust, and built his career on my back was now asking me for a job. I stared at the email for a long time, not with anger, but with a kind of detached pity. He was completely lost. He had no skills, no vision, nothing to offer except a name that was now synonymous with failure. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The silence was my answer. My most profound message isn't one of revenge, but of reclamation. For anyone out there who feels like the invisible engine in their own life, whether it's in your family, your job, or your relationships, your contribution has weight. Your silence has a cost. Don't wait for others to give you credit. Credit is not given. It is owned. Build your own name. Tell your own story. And if the people around you aren't willing to listen, then find a new audience. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stop giving your magic away for free. Let them see what their world looks like without it. You might be surprised at how much you thrive in a space that is entirely your own. If you've ever had to walk away to find your own worth, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. It's important we know we're not alone. Thank you for listening.